Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 528 for the 2nd of December 2018. Richard Saunders here with you from an unknown, undisclosed location, I should say. The past week, I have been hit by a runaway train called the man flu, or something like that. Not nice, not pleasant. Getting back on my feet now, sitting in a car. I won't go into it. It's a plane flying overhead. A bit mysterious, I know, but owing to my illness, I've had to grab bits and pieces of time to put the show together this week. It is a bit mysterious, isn't it? Coming up on this week's episode, more from Skepticon. Just last month here in Sydney, Australia, Maynard chats to linguist Lee Murray. And what a fascinating woman she is, too. She's going to be talking about linguistic accommodation, Australian English, Noam Chomsky, proto-languages, tonal languages, and all sorts of other things. If you love linguistics, this will be an interesting interview for you. And Maynard has another chat to Dr. Pamela Gay, our favourite astronomer, talking about thinking of others, reality TV, UFOs, and SETI. Where are those aliens? Maynard also catches up with one of the organisers of Skepticon, Luke Freeman, and Dr. Vyom Sharmer. After that, it's a news report from Jane Hansen, as read by me, about Dr. Julie Wileman, the famed anti-vaccination proponent. What's she up to now? Then to round off the show, and partly because I've been under the weather, which is probably under the boat, still not thinking clearly, some radio clips I did a couple of years ago on Sydney radio, talking to some hosts at two different occasions. The first clip is about chemtrails or condensation trails, and then I talk about Yowies, which is the Australian equivalent of Bigfoot, and the Dogman, whatever that is. But that's enough for me at the moment while I sit here watching aeroplanes take off from Sydney Airport. That might give you a clue as to my current location. I think you can hear it now. I mean, it would be nice to say to you I'm on some sort of secret skeptical mission undercover. It's not that glamorous. While I sit here and have another cup of coffee, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
Hi folks, it's time to get all sort of Noam Chomsky on you right now because I've got Lee with me, and I'll make sure I get the surname correct. That's Lee Murray. That's an easy one.
Murray like the river.
Yeah, and are you as clean as the river? That's an Australian joke.
Oh no, I've never heard that one.
Oh, well, because parts of the Murray aren't that great.
I thought we were talking about the Yarra.
Oh,
see,
yeah.
I'm from Melbourne. When you say river being dirty, that's the Yarra.
Yeah. And has it got any cleaner?
I don't know. I have to say I haven't really gone near it. I think it's still a bit brown.
Wow. And what's your favourite part of Melbourne? You're a Northcote person? You like mixing it with the hipsters, or you like to get out to Pascoe Vale? What do you like to do?
Oh, no. Well, I'm from the inner south, so I'm from Ranson Kilda way.
Ah, that is a great place.
Yeah, it is super nice. We've got the beach right there. We've got heaps of trees.
Still got heaps of nightlife, or people knocking it back a bit?
Well, I'm a little bit away from the part of St Kilda that has all the nightlife in it, thankfully. I'm in the nice sort of quiet pocket. So, no, we don't get too much of that, thankfully.
Well, the reason we're talking to you is because we're all about linguistic accommodation, which is, now, I would define that as, I've been listening to some American podcasts. So, first of all, I've started to do things in feet and inches for a start, not good for engineers. And second thing is, I used to say nuclear, and now I'm starting to say nuclear. I'm dividing it up into three. Now, is that me learning how they speak and taking it into, is that accommodation or not?
Well, accommodation's usually happening in the course of a conversation. So you might be accommodating to me now, or I might be accommodating to you. If it happens longer term, we'd probably just consider that part of you changing your language in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there any hard and fast rule as to who accommodates to who? Is it the person who starts speaking first? How does it work?
Oh, I don't know about hard and fast rules, but usually when people change the way they talk to adapt to someone, it's because it's someone who has more power than they do. Or someone who has sort of a higher status than they have.
Oh, okay.
A lot of the time.
Because I definitely accommodate when I'm talking to people who might be mechanics or something like that, and people that are doing some what I consider real work. Yep. And I go into their workshop and they're talking in a certain way. I start to talk like that just to, I don't know, so I don't seem like some uppity goose, like coming in there and going, "Ooh, I would like my tyre changed, thank you." I just talk a little bit more colloquially or something. I'm not quite sure, yeah. Yeah,
it's totally true. The power thing kind of kicks in when it's on a larger scale or a longer term scale. In person, it's just to do with decreasing social distance.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter the status of the person you're talking to, but if you want them to like you or if you want to get along better with them, you'll start to sound like them. And half the time you won't notice you're doing it.
Yeah. Is it actually much of a problem or not?
I don't think so. I think it helps people to get along better with each other. Oh. And anything that helps people to communicate more easily is a good thing in my book.
Yeah. And where would be the best place to observe this? Would you be to go to a place where people are having to have something done, or go to a university where people are talking to their professor? What's a good place we could observe this in action?
Many places. It's a question of where you can go without it being creepy.
Ah, yes. Creepy factor.
Yes. So you can always sit in a cafe and eavesdrop on the people behind you. I like to tell my students it's not creepy if it's ethnography.
Hey, or on a date. If you're out on a date with someone, and specifically a first date, because everyone's trying to work out, both parties might be trying to work out what's going on or not, even if they do or don't like the person. So, and you have been sitting at a cafe when there's obviously a first date going on. And it's almost hilarious, the level of awkwardness that all of us do on that situation, because you're trying to present your best self. And Tim Ferguson, I said, "So what was it like on the first date with your wife?" He said, "I was the most charming, beautiful person in the entire world. I've never been so more charming than that evening." Yeah, so, people work really hard.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that kind of thing happen with people meeting for the first time, because then you've got this huge difference between, say, a couple on their first date and a couple who've been married for years.
Yeah, where they just say nothing. Yeah. They're just staring at each other, and it seems like disdain, but no, that's just what you get after 30 years.
Well, that, and they're just really comfortable with each other.
Yes.
So there's not so much, or there might be some interruption or whatever else, but no one cares. They flip back and forth all the time. Whereas on the first date, you've got all the uncomfortable silences and the accidental interruptions, and sorry.
Yeah, because I was always like jumping in too quickly to fill a gap, and that's probably one of the worst things you can do.
Yes, because you feel the silences are awkward rather than just the other person coming up with what they're going to say. Yeah, absolutely.
Look, any advice then for a first date? First date linguistic conversation, what's the best way? And please don't say be yourself. You can say anything else, but everyone will go, "But I don't want to be me."
Don't mimic their accent on purpose, they'll know.
Ah, right, okay. Yes, they will know, because they know their accent.
Yes.
And they might think you're mocking their racial group or something as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that's what's really good advice, people. So, look, again, lifestyle tips here at the Skeptic Zone. And have you found the conference this weekend? Because a lot of people have been talking about various aspects of it that they've liked. What have you particularly got out of it?
Oh, it's great. I think the audience is a really, really friendly audience. They're really patient. They're really happy to come up and chat to you.
Ooh, and actually, what have they been asking you? First date tips, obviously.
I've been getting a lot of people ask me if I can tell them where they're from by listening to them.
And are you that good?
Depends. I can get indications sometimes, but no, I'm not. It's not like a magic trick.
And you got a degree in linguistics, or what exactly is it you've got?
Yes, I am most of the way through a PhD in linguistics, but I specialise in Australian English, and I specialise in how Australian English is different.
Wow. So is Noam Chomsky still revered as the guy, or do some people consider him a bit of a knob because of the way he carries on outside the field of linguistics sometimes?
Well, I think his work was earlier on and it was quite foundational. But I think since then, since he's stepped off and moved off into politics, other linguists have stepped in and they've been refining his theories ever since.
And the reason we don't know about them is because they haven't gone into other areas and gone, America must die, or whatever he's on about this week. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Everyone else is still on their way to getting published. Yep.
Wow. And so is his shadow necessarily a bad one? Because, you're a linguistic, so you must be an extreme communist.
No, I have to say, you're the first person who's ever said that to me.
Well, there you go. Yeah, we're on the cutting edge, because I always found, because his name's very sticky as well. That's part of it too. Like, you don't know Chomsky is like, it's like a book. You'd expect to see that on a book cover in an airport with an action novel. Yeah. Noam Chomsky, Air Force 47.
Yes, or written on a garden gnome. There's a whole series of garden gnomes that are Noam Chomsky.
That's pretty funny too.
Yes, well, it is. I'm one of the few linguists on the planet who hates puns, though.
Do they normally like them? Because I can see why you'd hate them. Because, look, I know Stephen Fry says they're a legitimate form of humour, and I'll go with that because he's been to university longer than me. But I can understand why you wouldn't, because if people keep one after the other, puns is just, one's okay, but they tend to come in a group.
Yes. No, I think linguists are generally fond of playing with words and fun with words.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I don't know. I think I'm an aberration.
So can you explain what your PhD is about at this point? Is it about the accommodation of language?
Sure. It's not strictly about accommodation. I'm looking at how Australian English is different from place to place and between different social groups, but I'm more interested in what other people think about that. So what can people who are not linguists actually tell about where someone's from or who they are based on how they talk?
Well, are you incorporating Indigenous language into this?
I'm not for this particular stage. I'm hoping once the PhD is over, I can then go on into that.
Yes, because that would just sort of complicate it, because then you'd be multiple languages. You'd have to your little Venn diagram would be getting pretty big.
Yes, PhD has to be about something really, really, really tiny and specific.
Oh, okay.
And then you write a book about it.
Yeah. And, once you've graduated as a PhD, linguist with a master's or whatever you've got, all those things, lots of things after your name, high distinction, I'm sure. Yeah. And then what do you do with that? How does one get employment in that? Obviously, I'm thinking you could work for a dictionary. And then that's how my little small ape brain runs out of ideas. But there's probably a whole world of things a linguist can do. Tell us what they are.
Well, lots of us go into academia, so we stay in the university, we teach and we do research and all that sort of thing. Some people go into government work, looking at language policy, particularly in education policy, like when you're looking at, remember the big deal a little while ago about teaching Aboriginal kids only English in school and refusing to teach them in their own languages?
Now, was that a racist thing, or was that a practical thing, like they couldn't find anyone that could do both? What was their argument for that?
I think their argument was that English is a more important language overall, but there was also an issue of resources.
Spoken, I guess you could say, but if they're in their own community...
Yeah, and then you've got the whole element of culture, because obviously for Aboriginal people there's this really close link between people, land, country and language. And if you deprive them of their language, then you've disrupted that. You've disrupted that cultural connection they've got. And so that's something we need to respect as we keep going as well. And so that's another thing that linguists are doing, is actually trying to keep these languages alive, trying to document them before they die out, because so many Indigenous languages are disappearing.
I was only speaking yesterday about Indigenous languages, that how many have we lost? And they said, well, you don't know because they're lost. So we don't know what's one we've lost. But a language construction I kind of like in Indigenous languages, I don't know if it's common to all of them, is that you just do a plural by saying the word twice. So crow is wagga, many crows is wagga wagga. That's just a great idea. I mean, you don't get specific with how many, but you know it's more than one.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many Australian languages do it, but yeah, that's definitely a thing. Yeah,
because I've never heard that anywhere else in the world. I mean, it probably has been used elsewhere, but it's not a bad idea.
Yes, it's there are lots of ways that Aboriginal languages are actually more complex and more interesting than English, which is a bit of a... People who are monolingual English speakers tend to think that they speak the most sophisticated language. But there's one really cool thing that you can do in a lot of Australian languages that you can't do in English, is that if you say we, as in the pronoun, you have choices that mean we, all of us, or we, all of us, except you.
So if someone's getting in trouble, look, that's a great way to do it,
Yeah.
Wow, that is really interesting. And people go on about is it the Romantic languages or the where it's Latin, Spanish, French? Those. Sorry, not Latin. That's the dead language. French, Spanish, and everything. Are those languages are just as good descriptively as English? Is there anything they do better or not, or has English got an edge because we've stolen stuff from everybody?
I don't know about better. They're probably a little bit easier to pick up in terms of remembering what's regular and what isn't, because English is made up mostly of exceptions.
Ah, okay.
And that gets really difficult for people who are learning it as a second language. There isn't really anything that a particular language does better than any other. So all languages are going to do everything you need in order to communicate, and they just do it slightly differently.
Okay.
So you've got all these people, you've got economists putting out articles about languages that, inverted commas, don't have a past tense or don't have a future tense, and how people who speak those languages are no good at saving money.
Get out!
And it's just...
That's so... Look, economists should learn to subtract for a start. They just seem to... If something goes wrong, that's going to cost this much and everything just goes up. You don't take away stuff. Economists must learn to subtract. There. That's
I think, yes, economists must learn to also just do economics, I think.
Yeah,
be part of it. Yeah, it's so many issues with that kind of thinking, but one of the big ones is just because the definition of tense is that it's marked on a verb. So... you can say they don't have part of a future tense. It's just because they're expressing it in some other way. It's not that it's not there. It's just that it's not on your verb.
So is that an example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you've got economists cutting your grass linguistically? Is that what's going on there, Dunning-Kruger?
Absolutely.
Right.
It's something that we come up with fairly commonly, or come up against fairly commonly, because everyone can talk. Everyone speaks a language. So everyone's confident that they know just as much about this as we do. And while for a sociolinguist like me, I love to hear what other people have to say about language, because I'm most interested in how other people perceive it, rather than just what it looks like taken away from everything else.
Wow. What's the oldest spoken language that we've got any record of? Would we be able to have a go at speaking Sumerian, for example? Would we be able to, what that would have sounded like at all?
Oh, I don't actually know what the earlier recording one is. We do have entire fields. Historical linguistics looks at exactly this kind of thing, trying to trace things back. So I know that we've gone back to, we've got records going back as far as whatever the language is that I don't remember or that I've never learned.
Okay.
But because we know things about how languages change over time, how sounds tend to change and how grammar tends to change, we can kind of take what we've got and work backwards. Wow. So what linguists have done is they've tried to reconstruct this language that languages have come from, and we call those proto-languages.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That is great.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm fascinated by the Japanese language, because the way their construction is just out of the park. I can't get my brain around it at all, but as I said, small ape brain. What is the language that fascinates you? Is there one that, you might not necessarily study, but you go, man, that is just under the table, that language. It's like, what's going on there?
Oh, interesting. I actually think I'd really like to learn more of Chinese, of Mandarin or of Cantonese, because I find languages with tones in them to be really interesting, where we change the pitch and that actually changes the sound. Well, yeah, because that changes what it means.
Because I've been trying to say in the morning in Cantonese, and it's Sasong Wu, but that's what it looks like, that's what it sounds like, but I'm hitting all the wrong bits. Yeah. And so I would say that to someone, and they wouldn't even know what one of the words was, because I'm not hitting it. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so bad at tones. I'm constantly saying to my students, did I get your name right? Did I get that right? And they go, yeah, it's fine. It wasn't fine. They're just being nice.
Yes. Oh, look, I've got the problem with Joe Benamou. I have to think cow at the end of the name, so it's pronounced Benamou, like that, and I'll get it wrong. Great, I've remembered the wrong pronunciation and all that kind of thing. And because in my business, names is everything. You've got to actually pronounce names right, and I get it wrong so many times.
Yes, that's.
And I'm sure I'm listening. It's just the recording and the memory of it's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when it's in a different language, that's a totally different thing. Yeah,
exactly. Where can we find out more about your PhD, what you're studying? Maybe we could finish the PhD for you, get it done quicker. I'm good for a lazy 10 minutes. I can help you out.
This is a crowdsource a PhD. If everyone takes a paragraph, we'll be good. No, you can find me on Twitter at Murray Lee A, letter A. You can find my website at leemurray.id.au.
Cool. Yeah. And so next time when you're talking to someone, see how much you're accommodating to their language, particularly if it's a first date. And remember, what are we not to do? Don't attempt their accent, because you'll think you're mocking them.
Exactly.
I'm a physical sciences kind of girl.
Look, I'm talking to someone now, of course, Dr. Pamela Gay. And look, I love the fact that the host for one of your podcasts is Fraser Crane, because I just think Frasier of the show. Yeah. And I think of that guy sitting there, and I know it's not a good image to have, but that's what I think when he says that,
Well, and he's had no end of problems, because he can't have a Wikipedia page because it keeps getting marked as fictional and withdrawn because he's not according to the internet, a real person.
I love it. Well, I mean, because I'm pretty much a fictional character. I have no problem, but he has someone else who has a fictional name, yeah.
Exactly. And it's just like this guy doing awesome science in Canada just can't get a break.
Oh, look. And of course, in the background, you can hear everyone talking because it's been a pretty successful Skepticon 2018. How did your talks go?
I think they went well. The audience told me they went well. It was one of these things where the world is on fire, and I tried to take on the nose some of the issues that is out there right now, the issues that we're dealing with climate change, with unconscious bias in the workforce, and with two different talking slots, we could hit a whole lot of dark topics, but I think I managed to end each of them with a bit of joy.
And did you catch Women's Woo with Trish Howell there? She was talking about Gwyneth Paltrow and her sort of stuff and that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, it's like that's really obvious marketing based on self-esteem, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and I hate to say it's not just...
oh, yeah, it goes to men as well.
It goes to everybody.
Men, yeah.
The fact that we use self-esteem to advertise, we are saying there is something wrong with you that this product will fix. That kind of hurts my soul, that instead of saying, hey, do this because it brings pleasure, because it brings happiness, do this because there's something wrong with you. That, to me, is just a way of making our society feel worse about themselves and manipulating them with it.
It's bad enough as it is, yeah.
It's too much of human history is defined by people putting people into subjugation by saying there is something wrong with you. Your skin is too dark, you have sinned too much. From religion to classism to color, we constantly find new ways to say, I'm better than you, and sell products so that you can pretend to be as good as me.
And look, Pamela, this be another reason you got rid of the television out of your house, because the reality TV is completely based on that. You kick someone off the island, you're picking on people. It's basically all about that.
And this is where we have to be careful to separate between reality TV like Big Brother and Survivor and the really good competitive shows that are out there. There have been some for costuming, there have been some. And when you offer someone a career at the end of it based on how well they were able to accomplish tasks when the playing field was leveled, I can totally get behind watching an hour's worth of creativity, but an hour's worth of people demeaning each other to see how they can mentally manipulate each other, life's too short.
It certainly is, yeah. And TV is look, I got rid of it as well. And also, we're talking about the news cycle. You're getting hammered by the news cycle all the time, and the news isn't changing. And if something bad has happened, you want to know about it, but you don't need to know about the intimate damage that's been done to the people's lives in the background, because you know that's going to happen anyway. And they go into details of it, and it makes it very hurtful.
And we're in a world where it's so easy to not just talk about the house fire down the street, but to talk about the house fires on the other side of the nation. And while I greatly appreciate how the internet has made the world so small, I'm an American from the Midwest currently sitting in Sydney, Australia. And I couldn't live the life I live if the internet didn't shrink the spaces between us. But at the same time, we live in a world that is so much safer than it's ever been on average. But the amount that we hear about murder and rape and death, it's too much. And we do need to be aware of what's going on. We do need to be aware of the refugee crisis. We do need to be aware of what's going on with the various religious wars and genocides and all these problems, but we don't need to be aware all the time.
Look, we'll just finish up with UFOs, because that's how we started when we bumped in on Friday night. And I do recommend UFOs Reframing the Debate. I looked up who it was. It was Richard someone. It's a whole bunch of essays, much of which you would probably dismiss as scientific hooey, but they're interesting thought experiments.
Okay.
Yeah, and so when people have come at you from all angles about UFOs over the years and alien life and that kind of thing, and what is your good answer to them? Because everyone go, oh, yeah, sure, you say you can't travel faster than light, but what if you go in between the spaces and stuff like that? And you've got to say, well, the spaces of what? Yeah.
At the end of the day, we are able to detect so many different existing satellites, so many existing asteroids because of how they block out the background sunlight. And these are rare events, and we haven't seen any of these that didn't match something known. With all of our explorations, sunlight is going to catch off of one of these suckers, and every time we see something, we can figure out what it is. Now, space is vast, and it is a great paradox why we haven't found intelligent life out there yet. Why is it that we don't see colonization? Why is it that we don't see Dyson spheres? This is one of the great scientific mysteries, because if there were scientifically advanced civilizations out there, we're fairly young. There should be older ones out there. Now, as a scientist, if my science tells me there should be aliens and I don't detect aliens, and I have to say this is a paradox and a problem, I'm probably not keeping aliens secret.
Right.
Now, our military constantly surprises us with the things they built in a warehouse that no one was looking in. And anytime someone talks about a UFO, I bring up examples of things like, for a while there was a triangular dirigible that was used as a heavy lift vehicle. It moved on paths that took it over mostly empty farmlands, but it regularly got spotted. And it was an investigative reporter that was able to piece together, oh wait, here are these declassified competitive plans to get funding to do a heavy lift dirigible design. What if? And oh yeah, that's exactly what this has been. And so all these triangular UFOs that had been spotted, instead of being high-moving, highly maneuverable, high-altitude vehicles, were very low, slow, close-moving dirigibles.
Well, see, it's always something like that, isn't it, usually? Unfortunately, yeah.
It usually is, and it turns out that in some ways is far more fascinating than UFOs.
How do you guys get on with SETI? Because you're all competing for similar funding now. Do you like chuck rocks over the fence at Seth or whatever his name is? Everyone's like, boo, mate, that's not real astronomy.
So I actually have a lot of really good friends over at the SETI Institute in Mountain View, and they're doing some really good science. The thing we have to remember is the SETI folks, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence folks, or Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligent Institute, they are actually trying to define what is the evidence in an atmosphere that is out of equilibrium and there's evidence of bacterial life. So is the methane on Mars an indicator of bacteria? Is the off chemistry at the surface of Titan evidence of life on Titan? It's the people working at the SETI Institute that are doing the detailed astrobiology research that are studying high acid, high temperature, cold temperature, these extreme environments on Earth to try and understand what are all the forms life can come in. There's amazing science to be done in the lead up to figuring out, is it safe for us to go to other worlds without fearing that we're going to be genocide to whatever might be there? Is it possible that there's life in more extreme environments than we ever imagined? SETI Institute's figuring out all of this. And, if they're using radio telescopes now and then to piggyback on the back of scientists to look for radio signals as well, I'm good with that.
I heard your companion Fraser Crane on a UFO podcast a few weeks back, and that it was again mirror image. We've got the kooky skeptic on, and he's going to come on, and he's not going to believe any of this stuff. And they're very polite to him and everything, but he was treated like he was the outlier because he wasn't in on the UFO stuff, and it was fascinating to hear that. And he was rational, and they were rational with each other, but there was just no meeting in the middle. Yeah.
It's when we can have rational dialogues that I have hope for the future. And the thing about that is there's always the people listening who are on the fence. And when they can hear a rational dialogue between people who are fervent believers in one side of an unproven argument or another, we can't definitively prove that we haven't been visited by aliens, and we can't definitively prove that we have. This is a question of belief. It's a question of how do you look at the probabilities and decide what has or hasn't happened and who you choose to believe. And It's the people on the fence who can listen to this and decide, I'm going to listen to the psychologists when I hear about these people talking about alien deductions and understand this is probably someone that had something terrible happen, but it wasn't aliens. And I'm going to help them get help instead of encouraging them to join all of these alien societies.
Oh, look, thank you very much for coming here. Some of the best private conversations I've had this weekend have been with you, Dr. Pamela Gay, and please come back to Australia again and say hello to Fraser Crane for me, because he did a great job on that UFO show.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure being here and always a pleasure being interviewed by you.
Like my suit?
I love your suit. You actually had an iridescent suit that was better, though. I'm going to say your iridescent was better.
I'll work harder next time.
Thank you.
All right. And of course, backstage here we've got one of the people who's making the whole thing go. Luke, how's it going? How's it smoothly going there?
You catch me halfway through singing Crowded House, but otherwise everything's going well. This is the quietest it's been all day.
Yes, because everyone's out there eating Lamingtons and Tim Tams.
Yeah, so I get to troubleshoot clickers and Macs and Keynote, so that's the fun stuff. And
has there been much trouble? Have people tried to load stuff and it's gone, the USB doesn't quite work?
Well, a couple of minor things, but to be honest, this is probably the smoothest it's ever run. So.
Wow. This is backstage. That's what we want to hear. Keep going. I'll let you get back to your Crowded House singing. And how come Crowded House don't sing Chocolate Cake enough? That's my favourite. I'm not a big Crowded House fan, but Chocolate Cake's my favourite song of theirs, and they don't give that song enough due.
Well, you know the way around that. You just play a different song on your device.
That's true. Yeah, like Right Said Fred, I'm Too Sexy. It's almost the same song as Chocolate Cake.
Yeah. True.
Okay, he's back to doing some work there. He's working. He's an actual worker. Unlike me, I just wander around mumbling into a microphone, claiming that it's some sort of job I have. Oh, here we go. Now, how did you go yesterday on stage there, sir?
The panel was a fantastic experience. It was really well balanced. Brad did a really good job moderating. What can I say? A lot of fun. Learned a lot of things too.
Now, you on today again?
Yes, that's right. I'm just about to go on stage and give my talk for the next 30 minutes, yeah.
Wow, okay. And what's your topic? I haven't looked it up on my cheat sheet.
The topic is what doctors don't know. Yeah, so...
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is the one thing you often knew you did that you don't? Is there some sort of breakthrough which would be fantastic for us to have as a society that we haven't quite got? What's the one thing? I mean, it's almost like you'd love to be psychic, but we know that doesn't exist. Yeah. So what's the thing you'd like that would really help your job?
I think if we could find good, meaningful, practical solutions to obesity, I think that would cause massive changes in public health. And it's funny, isn't it? That's really not even a biological solution necessarily. Often it's a social, political one.
Well, yeah, because sugar tastes really good, and that's part of the problem, isn't it?
That's right, exactly right. And so it's a bit of a struggle, and we need to kind of get more doctors on side with that. I think a lot already are. But, of course, there are breakthroughs that we're hoping and wishing for, particularly in metastatic cancer in general. And there's so much research kind of going on there, and we just hope all the smart people can...
Look, I know as a general practitioner you've got to be polite.
But it's quite funny when you talk to people and you find out the story about how it all led up to that point. Often you go, yeah, turns out it's not so simple as going, well, it happened because you took this bad decision. Bad decisions happened for several other reasons. And you learn very quickly, I think, in general practice to get out of the blame game and get into how do we fix this game, if that is a game?
Oh, so if you can't make general wide sweeping statements about people without any evidence, what's the point of being a doctor?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out myself, actually.
Well, go knock them dead.
All right, chat.
G'day, this is Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, proud to be a skeptic, and you can find out more about me at drkarl.com and get lots of free stuff there as well.
Here's a story that comes to us from Jane Hansen, writing in the Sunday Telegraph on the 25th of November 2018. Anti-vax activist charges parents $4,000 for, quote, expert report, end quote. An anti-vaccination activist with no medical training is charging $4,000 for a, quote, expert report, end quote, to parents in court cases to help parents who do not want to have their children vaccinated. The Sunday Telegraph can reveal that Dr. Judy Wileman has been involved in 4 separate court cases of estranged parents, where one parent does not wish to vaccinate the children, but the other parent does. Dr. Wileman also charges $150 an hour as an expert witness. However, her doctorate was in humanities and was controversially awarded by the University of Wollongong in 2016 amid harsh criticism from the scientific and medical community. Her thesis argued vaccination was a conspiracy. Australian Medical Association President Dr. Tony Bartoni blasted Dr. Wileman's claims as irresponsible. Quote, "It's disgusting. Her claims are ridiculous and lack any basis in science or medicine," end quote, Dr. Bartoni said. Immunologist and president of Friends of Science in Medicine, Professor John Dwyer, said if courts allowed Dr. Wileman to be an expert witness, there was something wrong with the legal system, while Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt said parents needed to listen to, quote, undisputed medical advice, end quote, and Dr. Wileman's research was not credible. Dr. Wileman was contacted but declined to answer our specific questions, instead defending herself in a series of emails. She claimed the purpose of this article was to, quote, denigrate my work with false and simplistic allegations about my academic arguments, end quote. Quote, the report you have been given is only one part of a very detailed report that was presented in a court case, and it is a fully referenced document. The scientific and political arguments that I have presented in court are in support of the public's right to choose in vaccination, end quote, she wrote. Quote, this information needs open and public debate, end quote. She then went on to threaten legal action if the Sunday Telegraph published a story that included, quote, simplistic and misleading statements about my report, end quote, and accused the paper of, quote, incompetence, end quote, spelt INCOMPETANCE. And that story comes to us from Jane Hansen, who you will recall won the inaugural Barry Williams Prize for Skeptical Journalism just last month at Skepticon here in Sydney. I'll link to this report in this week's show notes.
Hey, fellow skeptics.
Ben Radford here.
With Celestia Ward.
Your friendly host of Squaring the Strange.
A podcast that looks at topics ranging from legends, panics, and cryptids
to media myths, psychology, and folklore.
Breaking things down and picking things apart.
As we skeptics do.
We bring a few different perspectives on things.
Celestia, for example, is a witty cartoonist.
And Ben is a brilliant writer and longtime skeptical investigator.
We don't always agree.
But we have fun trying.
And we learn new things.
Join us for new topics every week or two.
Or browse our backlog of evergreen episodes.
Available on iTunes and all your podcast feeding troughs.
Squaring the Strange.
Take care, strangers.
Bye-bye.
Brings us to our section where we're going to talk about skeptics and skepticism, and I think today maybe we should put the crash helmets on, not the tinfoil hats, because I think there might be a few of our listeners who actually believe in these things, these chemtrails, which are these trails left by high-flying jet aircraft.
Yeah, you see them in the sky, those long white trails, and a lot of people do believe that they're filled with chemicals, biological agents, and even microchips that become embedded in your body. And then the government can tell you what to think.
The Chinese government apparently controlled the weather to make the opening of the Beijing Olympics dry, supposedly. You were there, weren't you?
Yeah, something did happen. Mysteriously, on the day of the opening ceremony, the fog parted and we had clear skies. It was weird.
Let's go to our skeptic, Richard Saunders, lifetime member of Skeptics Australia. He's on the line. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. Good morning.
Richard, do we need to be holding our breath when we look skywards?
I hope not. I hope not. This is a great one. This is a classic of skepticism. Now, everybody, I think, especially in the colder areas of Australia and the world, have seen these condensation trails or chemtrails, long streaks left by jet aircraft. And in some places in the world, they just crisscross the sky, and you can see these trails staying up there for hours on end because the air is very still. But there are a group of people out there, and quite a big group on the internet especially, who think that these lines represent the leftovers from evil chemicals, I wonder what they are, and even microchips dropped from airplanes by the government to control the population or to make us sick or to even control the weather. It's a wonderful classic of conspiracy theory.
There's quite a community, isn't there? And it's quite a very big community around the world on the internet who do actually believe in these chemtrails and that we're all being controlled by various authoritarian bodies. How would the microchips work, though? Do they fall down and just land on your head, or do they become embedded in your body?
Well, I guess the answer to that is they don't. Of course they don't work because they're non-existent, but you got to wonder. I mean, people like to throw around things like the conspiracy of the microchips and we're being controlled, but they're pretty short on the details. Maybe if they stand out there with a net one day and catch some and we can have them analyzed, that would be a start, I guess. But to the conspiracy theorists, it doesn't matter. All they have to do is put these wild ideas out there. They convince themselves that this must be the case, and other people around them will sort of fall in line. It's a bit of a worry, really.
I mean, people have been, and scientists have been trying to at least affect the weather over the years. They've tried to seed clouds. Is there any science behind the fact that we can alter the weather patterns?
Very, very little. I mean, the weather systems around the world, these are huge. We're covering continents and land masses and oceans, and they generate from, all sorts of parts of the world with storms and things. To think that we could control them with our present technology is simply laughable. Of course we can't do that. But to put everybody's mind at ease, these trails you see across the sky are perfectly understandable. At high altitudes, the air is very cold, something like minus 60 degrees. It's freezing, way below freezing. When the jet rushes by at supersonic speeds or subsonic speeds, depending on the jet, the air becomes superheated in the engine and then pushed straight back out. And this actually causes a cloud. And you can see this yourself on a cold day. If you go, breathe out on a cold day, everybody's seen a little bit of vapor. It disappears in a second. That's essentially the same things these aircraft are doing high up in the sky, except in the sky, the water instantly condensates around the superheated air, and the cloud simply hangs there. If it's not a windy day, it's not going to blow away very quickly.
But the believers think that what they're doing is sending out these biological agents or chemicals out there to what? To affect the population of the world? Or
yes, to control us. To fall in line with the one world government, or to make us sick, so we have to keep buying pharmaceutical drugs to keep us better, and then we get sick again, and it's an endless cycle. But it doesn't have to make sense. To the conspiracy theorists, these things don't actually have to make sense to the rest of us. They're convinced, and they're quite happy in that delusion.
Now, being a skeptic, can you ever pick a trend? I mean, are you one of those people who just cannot pick things because you're so skeptical that you go, no, I don't think this will ever take off?
I remember going to see Powderfinger when they were just starting off.
Yep.
And I walked away thinking, they're just another loud band. I didn't think...
It's become one of the most successful acts in Australian music history.
That's right. But we're not meant to instantly pick future trends. I mean, how can we? Sometimes we'll get it right, sometimes we'll get it wrong, like the rest of the population. If we got it right, if we could always pick trends, we'd be some sort of freak, and I think the skeptics would test you for the $100,000 prize.
Which takes us back to last week's topic of time travel. If only we could leap forward just a little bit. Hey, Richard, just a little bit. As always, great talking to you, and we'll start breathing in deeply again. Thank you very much.
Please do.
Shelled egg. Craziness. So we have to come back to that story. But something else that is equally fantastic and outrageous
Oh, the Yowies.
The Yowie. Now, you might not have seen a Yowie, Rob. I haven't seen one. I don't think Maurizio's seen one. But it doesn't mean that I don't believe that they're out there somewhere. Most people would have heard of a Yowie. Some people call them a Bigfoot or a hairy man. Sometimes there's even a version of it called the Dog Man.
All right.
And I'm a little bit obsessed with the Dog Man. My best friend Marcus, who I'm sure I'm going to have to get on the show at one point, is obsessed with the Dog Man. He's gone out into the bush camping to try and find the Dog Man. And swears that he's actually come across one.
So they're a mythological beast, aren't they?
Yeah, but they actually might exist out there in the bush somewhere in Australia.
There is a guy who said he's not only seen a Yowie, but he's almost been killed by a Yowie, not on one occasion, but 2 occasions. So are Yowie, are they real or are they fake? So we should speak to somebody about that.
We should talk to Richard Saunders because he's a life member of the Australian Skeptics Association. Now, what is the story of a Yowie, Richard, and how close did you actually come?
I've never come within a light year of a Yowie, I don't think. Maybe it was me in a suit on a dark night, I don't know. Yowies are very interesting. I mean, I remember first hearing about Yowies, roughly around the mid-1970s when I was a boy, and there were reports of Yowies which were on the tailcoats of the craze at the time for Bigfoot. In the 1970s, it was just a huge American craze for Bigfoot. People going out, there were movies and documentaries, and people have seen it. And I think it was a bit of envy here in Australia. People thought, oh, gee, we better cook up something ourselves. But legends, especially Aboriginal legends of mythical creatures, go back thousands upon thousands of years, of course. But what we're really talking about is the possibility of an ape or a human-like hairy creature running around the Australian bush.
How fascinating. I remember when I used to watch, I was obsessed with a show called Great Unsolved Mysteries or something like that Leonard Nimoy used to voice.
That's right, yeah.
And every so often they would replay the Yowie or the Bigfoot episode, and it was all about whether the footage was real and what the evidence was and going back through history and evolution to find out where it might have come from. What's the story about where the Aussie Yowie might have come from?
Well, I mean, since there's no really good evidence to suspect that it actually exists, then people can sort of let their imaginations run wild and come up with all sorts of ideas and theories about it. That show was called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. That was a good show. That was a good show. But when we seriously look at it, and if we assume for a moment, well, these things are real, there are real ape-like or human-like creatures in Australia, then they must be part of the environment like any other animal. They must have a breeding population for genetic diversity. They must have prey. They must eat at least trees or berries or something. They must leave remains. They must leave carcasses. They must have a fossil record. None of these are apparent. There is no evidence of anything like that. The best evidence people have are footprints. And I've seen the footprints collected by somebody called Rex Gilroy in the Blue Mountains, who has a multitude of giant footprints of plaster casts. But unfortunately, they can simply be made. That's just not very good evidence at all.
Are you saying it's a fake footprint? I won't have it.
You're saying it's manufactured.
Well, one of the giveaways about that is they look comical to begin with. They're completely oversized. And they're even. Now, if a giant creature, say 12 feet tall, a couple of meters tall, is stomping about, they put their heel in, and as we all do, on sand or whatever, they'll make very distinctive footprints. Most of the footprints I've seen, I'm looking at some now, are quite even, as if they've been carefully chiseled and carved and created. But, plaster casts of giant footprints are fun and interesting, certainly don't constitute evidence. We need a strand of hair. Then we can get some DNA and discover what it's all about. But I get back to the original point. If these creatures exist, they must be part of the natural Australian environment like every other animal, but there's just no evidence for it.
So, Richard, it's like a Loch Ness monster with legs, and we don't have physical proof that they exist.
Yeah.
I mentioned there was this gentleman who had dedicated his life to hunting down Yowies, and he has said that he's run into them a couple of times and almost been killed by a Yowie on 2 occasions. Have you ever spoken to that particular gentleman? I don't have his name.
No reports like that have come my way. Unfortunately, that doesn't constitute evidence either. If somebody says, this happened to me, then, and if 10 people say this happened to me, that's still not evidence. That's just people saying this happened to me. What really happened, we just don't know. We weren't there. There's a spectrum of things for genuinely mistaking what happened on the cold night or whatever it was, or fabrication, and we don't know. It simply doesn't mean that we even begin to believe, because of all the other evidence that's not there to back it up.
Now, have you come across the Dogman stories? Because Dogman's slightly different to the Yowie story. So basically it kind of sounds like something that's evolved in the outback from maybe something that, like the werewolf stories, it's like the dingo version. And it will look like it's a very large running kind of humanoid dingo, and then they are seen to stand up on some very exotic horizon, and you can just see their profiles. And I've read so many stories like this that some part of me thinks that maybe there's something to it.
Yeah, again, wow, that's great. I mean, people have wonderful imaginations, but unfortunately, it sounds like an old European legend just co-opted for Australia. It really does.
Can I just say, Meakin, Richard is from the Australian Skeptics Society.
Nevertheless, if people could bring us a carcass or a bit of hair, and we could, and it would prove to be a Yowie or a creature unknown to science, that's what science is all about. Discovering new things. We wouldn't then say no, it's impossible, it can't be. We'll never believe it. We go by what the best scientific evidence suggests or brings to our attention. Again, with the werewolf character in the outback or the Yowie, if they're there, great. If they are there, where is all the confirming evidence like every other creature?
Yeah, so you're open to the fact that these things will exist if you get some evidence. So I suppose that's pretty much sums up what the Australian Skeptics are all about. Hey, sure. Richard, over the summer we're going to talk to you on a few more occasions and find out about other things you don't believe in, okay? What about that?
That sounds good to me. If people want to find out more, they can go to skeptics.com.au.
All right, mate. You have a lovely Christmas, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
That is Richard Saunders from the Australian Skeptics. All right, the time is 8:15, and in Brisbane, that's 8:15.
Hello, listeners of Maximum Fun. I want to tell you about our newest podcast that tells you all about the truth of the flat Earth.
Have you been looking out over the horizon and you've been thinking, wait a minute, this doesn't look round. I've been lied to my whole life.
What is NASA doing with $52 million a day?
Come on. We explode the myths.
Just kidding. We're Ono, Ross, and Carrie, and we investigate extraordinary claims.
That's right. We investigate extraordinary claims firsthand. We go undercover in fringe groups. We get alternative medicine treatments. And we hang out with people who have unusual beliefs, like flat earthers, 9/11 truthers.
We do ghost investigations. We've joined Scientology, and we got baptized in the Mormon Church.
If it goes bump in the night, then so do we. Why don't you check out Ono, Ross, and Carrie at MaximumFun.org?
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Next week, even more from Skepticon, where Maynard chats to Kerry Poppy from the Ono, Ross, and Kerry podcast. Now, just a quick note about this saying, this term, this expression, man flu. I had to wonder about it this week because somebody said to me along the way when I was chatting to somebody, they used the term man flu. Oh, you've just got man flu. Men can't handle being sick. Well, this might be the case in certain situations, but I can promise you that when you're lying in bed with a fever, coughing, head pounding, not being able to think clearly, it's okay. You sometimes men and women get really sick and it's a virus or it's an infection or something like that. So be kind. If someone says they're really feeling ill, don't write it off as man flu. Not necessarily, maybe it is. I'm on the mend now. I'm feeling somewhat better as I'm still sitting here in my car on my secret mission. Thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone through Patreon and PayPal. You can do that at skepticzone.tv. It's you people who actually support the show. That means everybody else can listen to the show. Without your support, the show would stop probably next week. And I notice over at Maynard.com.au, Maynard's putting up lots of podcasts, as he normally does this time of year for Maynard's Christmas podcasts. And the latest news on the calendar is, I think Maynard tells me that will be available maybe next week or the week after. Keep an eye at Maynard.com.au for Maynard's annual calendar. But for this week, I'm going back to bed. This is Richard Saunders signing off from a mysterious location, Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.